If your company sells anything online, this episode may be of interest to you. Just like the way AI has changed the way that people search for things, Agentic Commerce very well may change the way people shop and buy things online. Now, to talk about this, I brought in probably somebody who I consider one of the world's experts on Agentic Commerce. He's worked with some of the leading, biggest retailers online, Walmart, Wayfair. He's advised dozens of e-commerce platforms at the enterprise space. Tim Resnik, welcome to the show. You're our very first guest.
Oh my God. Thank you, Cyrus.
So you and I go a long way back. We used to work together at Moz. Let's take a step back. So if
Sure.
Imagine you're at a party and talking to someone that they ask you what you do and you discuss agentic e-commerce. How do you explain what agentic e-commerce is to the layperson?
My response to start would maybe be a little snarky and say it's probably the wrong term.
Is it the right term? What are we calling it? What are we calling this?
I myself have called this for a long time agentic commerce, but now being in the discovery mode and talking with a lot of e-commerce companies, just being in the market, talking to a lot of practitioners, talking to many of the first integrators, I think agentic commerce is just conflating too many things, right? It's kind of like the term AGI, artificial general intelligence. It depends on the definition of what you're talking about, and people have their own definition for what agentic commerce means. And I think really what it means is this experience where you have, instead of a human shopping and buying things, you have a robot or an agent that's going out and it's doing the discovery for you. It's doing the consideration, maybe involving you in the loop to some degree. And then it's actually making the transaction and dealing with the order until the thing just comes to your door. So you open your fridge and there's no orange juice left. All of a sudden there's some orange juice in your fridge type of thing. I think that's like the pure definition of pure delegated autonomy to an agent. But I don't think we're even close to that yet. So calling it agentic commerce is probably wrong. We should probably call it something like AI-powered shopping, AI-powered discovery, along those lines.
Okay, so we're taking baby steps towards this full agentic experience front to end. So let me ask you this. Right now, I work with a lot of companies. They're concerned about their AI visibility. They know that AI bots are coming to their site and consuming the content. How does the areas you're working in change how AI agents and AI bots are consuming content?
So traditionally, SEO and e-commerce has been built on crawlers coming to your site, specifically Google, right? And being able to first find the content. And this isn't just e-commerce, this is just SEO. So you have things like sitemaps, you have things like internal linking, really strong information architecture, you have good content. It can kind of figure out semantically what all these things, entities on your site are about. And it can crawl it, and then it can process it, right? And it can then index it, et cetera. So all of that stuff is more important than ever. Like, honestly, it's more important than ever. So all the things that all the SEOs do out there, they need to keep doing. The thing that is changing a little bit is the push mechanism, right? For a long time, Google Merchant Center has had the concept of free listing, Google organic shopping. So when you either are on Google search surface or you're within Google Shopping itself or other surfaces, you'll see these product cards. And some of those product cards, like at the top, are the ads. So the product listing ads that also come from the feed. But there are those product cards that also come up within the content of the search engine itself. And those are organic listings. And there's a toggle within Merchant Center. Essentially, you can say enable free listings, and that's enabling those free listings. So with agentic, what is happening is that Google needs that information really, really quickly, right? Or AI shopping, let's call it. So the feeds are important to be able to express real-time availability and pricing. And they need to know what products are out there in the universe to be able to suggest to their shoppers on these platforms in real time. So there's a couple different protocols, right? There's the Agentic Commerce Protocol. That is OpenAI's protocol, and we'll talk about that in a second. And then there's the universal Commerce protocol, which is Google's. Now, let's start with, we'll just call it UCP for short. That's what it's called. It is a protocol. It is a conversational, basically a communication layer in between a website, an e-commerce site, and a bot, a robot, an agent, where the agent can understand what it's allowed to do on that site, right? So there's like a manifest saying these are all the things you can do. You can transact, you can find products, you can suggest things, etc. And then it'll allow them to actually transact. So it's all connected and the wiring's all connected with the payment processing. And it will allow them to track the order as well. So it's really meant to be more bottom of the funnel integration, right? Of all of that stuff that you would usually go as a customer to like Walmart.com or to Amazon or whatever, and you would go all the way down the funnel and click purchase, add to cart, purchase, etc. Now, on top of that is the feeds layer, because there has to be that discovery layer too, just like in search, right? If you're searching for a product, like if Google or your agent doesn't know that product exists in the universe, how is it possibly going to suggest it to you? So that's where the feed layer comes in on Universal Commerce Protocol. On OpenAI's side, the Agentic Commerce Protocol, that is a combination of the two. So they have that transactional and order layer, plus they have the discovery layer. So retailers are actually pushing through their catalog and pushing through the rules in terms of what you can do with the catalog in terms of transacting. So really the idea is we've been building our e-commerce stacks for, 25, 30 years, right? And they've been built for like you and me, humans that can go and transact. They were not built for robots to be able to understand exactly what the content is and what they're allowed to do, et cetera. So this is a way to take all of that disparity and have a translation layer so the agents can interact.
So it sounds like the feed layer is still very prominently important, and that doesn't change a whole lot, or is it changing?
The first is that the content within that feed is becoming more and more important. A lot of SEOs historically have kind of, for whatever reason, just taken it for granted because it's something that typically the paid teams will manage, right? They're managing the feed. So we're like, oh yeah, okay, let's just use our feed and toggle the like free listings toggle in Google Merchant Center. While of course the content within the feeds is important for ads as well, there's a whole nother layer of optimization for ads that Google does for you in PMax. And so I don't think the same amount of attention goes into the actual enrichment and optimization of those fields for paid search or not the same methods, I would say, as organic search. And so that's number one, like making sure that your title information is really good and leans towards conversation rather than just keywords. So more semantic understanding rather than just keyword understanding. So your title, your description, your attributes are super important in there. And then of course, pricing and availability is key. Like those things have to be right or those items don't get accepted. The whole feed can actually get disapproved if you have a lot of errors coming up in price and availability. The second piece is Google's actually added some new fields specifically to help them with discovery and AI. So these are things that have never been there before. So one is called structured title.
Okay.
Another is called structured description, and it's kind of exactly what it is. It's a title and a description. But the cool thing is what you can do is you can train it. You can basically create it with AI. So it is encouraged in some ways. And in fact, there's another flag in the field that tells Google this is algorithmically trained content. And so this way you can build your workflows, your pipelines to basically create these really robust descriptions and titles that are aligned with your brand, right? Having prompts that you make sure your brand information's aligned. You can even put a little strategy in there if you notice something in the competitive market that your competitors aren't doing that you want to do and position. And you can start pushing these through the feed. So structured title, structured description, and they've said they're going to release 13 more of these things. They haven't said exactly what they are, but if you read between the lines and you see what you can do with ACP, FAQs is an example of something that they could be releasing, where you can just list a long, long list of 100 different FAQs about the product to help provide that context to the different AI, or to Gemini specifically, to surface on these different AI surfaces.
Yeah. Are you seeing evidence that Google's using these fields in AI responses?
Too early to tell. We've run some experiments, but I would say they're not yet to the point where I would confidently claim success and say they're definitely using these fields. But I would be pretty surprised if they did it. If you just think about how these models are working and what they're actually trying to accomplish. And, the fact that they only have 6-10 design partners right now on this, I haven't run any test with those folks. Those are the folks that are running their own experiments, and they're working as integration partners day to day with Google. And I'm sure they know the answer to that question. And I have the exact same one, but I have a feeling they'll use it. If they're going to put it in there, like, why wouldn't they use it?
We were talking offline about reviews last time we talked. What are some opportunities there for merchants to position themselves better? Because reviews are so huge in Google, not so much in OpenAI yet, from what I can tell, but they really influence the buying decision.
It's funny you say that, because OpenAI and ACP, they actually have a field within their feed for raw reviews, which Google doesn't. So Google only allows you to put like an aggregate review information in there. They don't allow you to put any sort of raw reviews. So theoretically, at least speaking with OpenAI, you could filter out your best reviews, or filter in your best reviews, and just provide those. Because of course you're not going to want to post poor reviews and let that hurt your rankings or hurt the brand sentiment or whatever. So there's like some control there. I think probably eventually Google will allow something like that. I think reviews and kind of that customer trust signal is incredibly important. So if you can get reviews, you can encourage people to give reviews, very robust reviews also about like how the product's working, features of the products, things like that. I do think that's going to help ultimately with rankings, citations, things like that.
Yeah. Let's go back to feeds a little bit. You're the e-commerce expert. I've had some e-commerce clients with product feeds, and to a lot of mid-size or smaller teams, they really want to push that work off. Those feeds are handled by third-party companies. What feeds should people be worrying about, and what opportunities are people not doing that they should?
I think number one, the feeds you should worry about, as we've always said in SEO, just start with Google. It is the most important. And you want to there's plenty of providers out there that will syndicate your feeds. I'm sure you can find them online. I think really what it comes down to, though, like, it's not, of course, the feed has to be well structured. You have to deliver it so Google can parse it and understand it, make sure there's no errors, like the real basic stuff. But what it comes down to is the content that you're using to pass through into the feed. So the feed is just a simple file, right? A structured file, but it's really your catalog content that needs to be fixed, probably, for, enriching things, to just make titles more robust, more conversational, descriptions, making sure that the product specifications are robust. And it depends on what sort of e-commerce site you are. Like, if you are a gigantic marketplace, there's various like workflow and work stream issues that you have to deal with, because you might have thousands of suppliers, millions even, like, just inputting information, and there's a pipeline of content coming into your centralized catalog system. And now that source of truth is being used to broadcast out in these feeds. So getting as close to the source as possible as you can, the source of truth, and making sure that content is well enriched is critical, has all the attributes that you need around it so that it can power conversational search.
Tim, where do you see this going in 3 to 5 years? What do you think the landscape looks like when we have this conversation 3 years from now?
This is a fun one. It's a really tough question. There's so much to work out in this system. And we've all seen false starts from, I mean, specifically Google before.
Yeah, it feels
And
like we get product announcements from Google that there's the latest protocol or the latest platform, and I think a lot of marketing teams out there are waiting for someone like you, frankly, to tell them what to do and what they need to adopt because it seems all very experimental at this stage.
yes, and I don't think OpenAI has helped. I think they have really actually hurt the cause here. They've pumped it up, they've promoted it. They told the world that we're going into this new era of agentic commerce, and they built this platform. And then they got a ton of demand from retailers to like get onto it. And, there's a form you filled out or whatever online, and they just never got back to anyone. They're now not going to be doing in chat GPT transactions anymore. They are now asking retailers to build apps on top of chat GPT. And, all this negative news has come out about agentic commerce because of this. First of all, is their number one kind of integrator, marquee integrator was Walmart. And the CPO of Walmart came out and said, yeah, whatever, it's an interesting experiment. We ran 200,000 products through it, but man, our conversion rates were like 3 times. And then after that, they just pulled the rug out and said, okay, Walmart's going to be just an app on ChatGPT now. And so I think that has not really been great press for agentic commerce in itself. And I think now, if you think about just like a hype cycle, right? And you think about the peak of a hype cycle, I think we've crested that peak. We're probably going down into this trough of disillusionment. And you're on LinkedIn all the time, and you see how people now are kind of suddenly shifting away from that narrative of agentic commerce. So I think before we beat up too much on Google, we should first beat up on OpenAI a little bit.
Yeah, because the merchants I work with, you see their Google traffic declining, but the transactions all happen with real humans, on the website. And I think everybody's sort of waiting for that magic moment when when an AI is actually pulling the trigger for somebody, personal agent. I think we're probably a year away from even the smallest inklings of that because people just aren't ready except for the hardcore adopters. But I can see it being a future. I can see myself making purchases, in my agentic screen here without having to visit Amazon or Walmart or whatever. I can see once that trust is there, I think that may be very common for us. Do you agree or disagree with that sentiment? What do you see of the risks when people aren't actually landing on your website anymore and they're talking with these interfaces that we don't own anymore?
I've been thinking a lot about this, and I've been lucky enough to work at 2 of the main integrators now and work with the product people and engineering folks that are doing this work. And I'm getting a lot of like really interesting anecdotal information, and it's leading me to ask the question or just kind of believe in the statement that, what e-commerce is pretty good at? E-commerce. But they've been building these e-commerce experiences for so many years, right? And there's really smart people at these companies, data scientists, engineers, product managers, marketers. Like, these things have been built around personas and customer experiences and really specific use cases. Like, shopping is a broad use case, right? I think what Google learned 10 years ago with Google Express, which was their attempt to bring the transaction into Google Shopping, probably what they learned there is e-commerce isn't easy, right? It's not just about letting someone push a button and transact. I know for a fact that they're having issues with multi-items in a cart, and that's a very simple use case, right? So when you're on Gemini or whatever and you find a product and you want to put it in a cart, I can't really do it. I think maybe they've introduced a few things, but now let's start talking about multi-retailer, multi-carts. So I have, let's say I have an item from Target and an item from Walmart together in a cart. There's complexities there too, right? With shipping. And there's no concept of upselling. There's no concept of bundling products together. So the real problem here is that e-commerce and shopping experiences are not simple and straightforward. There's lots of nuance to it. And I think there's 3 different adoption curves going on. There's the protocol adoption curve, and Google has invested a ton of money and time in building this protocol. There's the retailer adoption curve. How quickly are they going to integrate into these and allow these things to happen? And then there's the consumer adoption curve. And the first 2 are maybe somewhat on the same parallel track, but the consumer one is disconnected. And that's actually the most important one.
I remember the first time I bought something online with a credit card back in, the 1990s probably, and how scary it was. Double checking my credit card, thinking my information was going to get stolen, thinking something weird was going to happen. And then reflecting on that to today when it's just so commonplace and it's so much easier. I imagine the very first, agentic commerce transactions are going to be very similar, where people are buying very simple commodities. Google, buy my batteries from Amazon for me, check for a better price, and, get them shipped here as fast as possible, where the friction is lower. But I imagine that day's coming, and 15 years from now, we'll remember that first agentic commerce transaction that we made and look back and laugh.
Okay. Speaking of which, here's a curveball for you. Have you ever looked at your Amazon purchase history?
Way too much. Yes.
Okay. And you can go back to the very first purchase?
I did not consider that. Is there a shortcut to get to the deep, deep pages?
I think it's just paginated, or you can do it by year or something. Anyway, mine was a DVD. It was Run Lola Run, if you remember that movie at all.
Oh, yeah.
So anyway, to your point, it's going to be very interesting to see like the first thing we bought agentically and be like, oh, that's hilarious. I bought a toilet or something or whatever.
2005, 2006.
Oh, you're going for it.
Here it is. It was a book. It was a used book, Enigma by Robert Harris. Looks like I bought a lot of books on Amazon back when they were primarily a bookseller, I guess.
I was going to say, everyone was shocked when they announced they were going to start selling electronics. You're like, what? You can't sell electronics. You're a bookstore.
Right. So I think the people listening to watching this interview are the ones who want to be at the forefront of that technology, who want to be the first in line. So when we think about AI and appearing in AI answers, appearing in Chat GPT, what are things that merchants and retailers should be doing today to either optimize for now or get them prepared and get in the mindset for preparing for that future?
Yeah, so some of these things we already talked about. I can give a quick view of what I see as like the top things, the 3 most important things. And I will say, just in case anyone missed it the first time, is SEO is pretty important. Like your fundamentals, they're called fundamentals for a reason. Some of these things with e-commerce we've always been concerned about. So, and I'll go over just high level what those are, like making sure the right parts of your site are actually crawlable, like the content that you want exposed, the products that you want exposed are exposed, making sure that the wrong parts of your site are not findable and crawlable. There's lots of people who have millions, tens of millions of search query pages that are not well targeted, that are just a waste of crawl budget. Making sure that your pages can be processed. And this is something that I believe Botify does very, very well, is helping the crawlers see the HTML rather than having to process JavaScript. There's things that can be done though, either on the shopping platforms that you're on, or if you own your own stack with regards to making sure the right content is client-side rendered versus server-side rendered, things like that. Because if there's lots of JavaScript, we know really all the non-Google bots, especially like anything coming from OpenAI, not that they're crawling the full web at this point, but they have a hard time processing JavaScript. It costs Google a lot of money, and we know Google's putting a lot of money into other things, probably like data centers and TPUs and chips and all that stuff. So they'd probably prefer to have really fast HTML.
Yeah.
Information architecture, like again, this is like basic SEO stuff and just having semantic relationships organized well in your taxonomy, just making sure the content's useful and people are using it. I mean, think about this. If you're searching on AI mode, for example, or if there is any sort of agentic experience where an agent is leading you to sites to go buy things, of course it's going to consider what you do on that site for either your next action it takes on your behalf or a group of users like you. So when it comes to your site and the user sees a bunch of content that is useless and it's not helpful, or they don't transact, or they don't go deeper, I think you called this like a bad click, right? And they hit the back button, they go right back to their agent, or they tell their agent they don't like this thing. Those signals are, I think, going to be even more important moving forward, and probably like a lot easier for Google to interpret and then also like personalize for users. So there's that. So what are your thoughts of like how those things are going to change in the age of AI search?
It's interesting because we've learned that Google relies on us, users, to rank websites. And as they reduce clicks to publishers, they have less data to work with. So there's some evidence that Google is using AI and machine learning itself to kind of model us, synthetic personas. I used to work as a Google quality rater. There's evidence that they've replaced Google quality raters, at least, on the relevance side, to kind of estimate how relevant web pages are. So it's kind of like humans are sort of being replaced at every level of the algorithm. And it's really interesting. And Google really relies on that human data, and that's their structural advantage that OpenAI doesn't have, because OpenAI, doesn't really measure clicks to the web. So OpenAI relies on Google and third-party providers of Google search results. It's just an interesting ecosystem. But at the end of the day, it's what we do as humans that really makes a difference. So I think that holistic way of thinking about it is excellent advice. Yeah. So we have the SEO portion of how merchants and e-commerce folks should think about this. What are the next steps to think about what they should be doing today to prepare for this agentic future?
First of all, I did not know you were a quality rater. That was fascinating.
A side note on the quality rater, and we could talk a lot about this, is I was always surprised how hard the job was. It takes you 2 weeks to pass all the tests unpaid. And then when you start, you're kind of an apprentice. You're grading, and your grades are scored against more experienced raters. So many raters are scoring the same page, and you have to get within a certain field, a certain range. And if you don't, you kind of get reprimanded. So it's a little bit more stressful than I thought, and a little more structured than I thought.
So it is fascinating because it takes you through some of the machine learning improvements to where we are today through the years. Because really, I mean, what were the quality raters doing? It was supervised training, supervised learning, right? I mean, you were giving feedback into the system, and so the algorithms could get better and continue to get better and better and better. But now we're all the way to this place of like recursive learning that we no longer need that, and the AI is doing it on its own. So you're right. It's like a whole nother subject that is this completely fascinating, and that the implications for SEO is that SEO has always been somewhat of a black box, but now there's a black box on a black box. And so there's a lot more to figure out. So I think it's actually great for SEOs because there's a lot of work to do.
Do you mind if we talk about that a little bit? You talk about a black box. You're actually kind of working on something interesting in this agentic space. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So again, I mentioned at the beginning of the conversation that a good friend of mine, Jay Leary, we've built a tool to essentially enrich parts of the catalog and segment parts of the catalog to experiment and see if like changing this field and optimizing this specific field will have an impact across Google shopping surfaces, Google AI surfaces, of course, organic search, And then also looking at analytics and Search Console data and things like that.
What are the levers within that platform? What are the main levers that you think are the biggest opportunities for optimization?
Yeah, so that will get us back on track from we're talking the foundational SEO back. We rabbit holed a little bit into quality rating, which is I'm very fascinated with. But I would say number one is just the enrichment of the catalog data, as I've mentioned a couple times, and that you could break that down into three, kind of in a hierarchy of three different concerns. One being like, what is the actual primary feed that you're sending to Google Merchant Center, like clear of errors? I mean, that's just the most basic. Like you'd be surprised looking at in people's Google Merchant Center account how many of their listings are having errors, like the product page is not resolving to where it's supposed to resolve. The image is not referenced properly. It's missing a key thing like title. Maybe it's even missing like a G10 or SKU.
Yeah, I've been in that situation where you upload, 10,000 products and 8,000 come back marked with errors. And it can be a very manual process trying to figure out what's going on and how to fix all those.
Yep. So that's number one. That's just like foundational. Similar to like sitemaps or whatever, right? If you have a bunch of garbage, crappy sitemaps with dirty URLs in them that end up in a 404 or some sort of redirect or even a 500, that's not helping your cause at all. It's like the first signal you're sending to the crawlers that like, I'm sending you bad information to broken pages. Same with the feed to Google Merchant Center. The second piece is what we spoke about before, and that's like with the conversational fields that I'm talking about. So structured title, structured description. There's also a field called product highlights in which you can like summarize the highlights of the product. And then the third piece kind of circles all the way back to SEO, and that is your schema, right? Your schema.org, your product schema on your page. These things all need to be in sync and talking kind of the same general language. Like, so your titles and descriptions in your schema should be populated. They should be robust. They should probably mirror what's in your Google Merchant Center. The content on your page, your meta title, your meta description, those things, like this kind of trifecta of information is going to be evaluated during these conversations, and they should be evaluated as an SEO. So that
you bring up an interesting point about schema, because it's something we always get asked about as SEOs, about what schema is important and not. And this creates an interesting possibility where we kind of have an idea of how much, regular Google search, how much schema they ingest. And sometimes they just ignore it if it's superfluous. But if you're I see a potential for feeding AI agents schema directly, in which case I can't imagine they would not ingest it and just ingest everything that you give them. It makes it a potentially interesting situation.
And why not clean it up? If you're going to clean up your feed and you're going to clean up your titles, your descriptions, and all that content, like you might as well repackage that through a different pipeline that you have that's creating your on-page schema.org elements.
Yeah, absolutely. So cleaning up all those feed items. So what's after that?
Yeah, so we talked a little about this, but I think the semantic connections are even more important now, right? Especially if you work with a really reputable brand with high brand authority. Internal linking is critical, and it's not just linking through the taxonomy or the hierarchy, right? And those sorts of relationships, but also linking through non-linear relationships. So co-view or co-occurrence. A lot of customers look at this thing, let's say diapers or whatever, and then they go and look at this other thing, a rocking chair, which don't really have anything semantically to do with each other, but they relate because it happens in a particular time of life. So a very simple example, but there's so many relationships that go unnoticed that are probably not semantically related that you want to better understand and make sure you're linking from those products up into the categories and into the hierarchy. And then of course, back down from the top of the hierarchy down.
Interesting. Okay. So if a marketer working for a e-commerce platform, if they did one thing after listening to this episode today, what would that one thing be?
Yes. So I guess I'll bring it back to something that has nothing to do with a tactic. It's more of a mindset. And I actually think marketers and specifically SEOs are already really good at this tactic or at this mindset. And that is just being a scientist. Act like a scientist, a curious scientist. Again, we're in a very, very ambiguous time with product discovery, with SEO, with technology in general. There's no definitive answers to anything. It's really hard to get to those. And those answers are really specific to different scenarios, right? And there's a lot of nuance to it. And so really the only way out is through and trying small scale experiments, right? Having a hypothesis, testing that, measuring it, repeating it, iterating over and over and over until you get to some answers, because that's the only way. But when you're really talking about the incremental growth and how to differentiate between all the other stuff out there, you're just going to have to play around and experiment.
So Tim, I see this future where people come to your website and you control that environment. But in AI, everybody has the same information. The AI knows about your competitors. They know about how do you differentiate yourself in that environment where everybody has access to free information?
Yeah.
How do you compete on price in that environment?
I love that question. I mean, I'm not an economist, but I do understand the concept of a perfectly competitive environment, which is basically where supply exactly matches demand and there's very little margin for whatever's being sold. And I think we could get to a place like that where everyone is racing towards this zero margin. And then what's the point of even selling it? This isn't saying it disparagingly, but I think marketers end up like exploiting some of those areas where there's not complete information, right? But now in this era of AI, if everything is being optimized also by AI and the agents have perfect information, then what can you really optimize towards? And I think it comes down to a couple very basic things. One is operational excellence and scale. So, Amazon, Walmart, they're probably going to be just fine. Walmart happens to be really, really good at supply chain, really, really good at keeping prices down. So they're going to win on that. And small retailers not going to be able to compete. The other piece is brand, right? And loyalty. Because at the end of the day, there's going to be a real person, I hope, behind the agent that is buying something. And that person is going to have an affinity and they're going to have loyalty to a brand. Sometimes it will be an irrational loyalty, but it's still like a loyalty that you can build upon, right? And there's so many examples out there in the world of brands that have built somewhat of an irrational loyalty. So I think this is a big moment for brand marketing, right? And it's a big moment for things like PR as well and positive sentiment and building that positive brand message and getting people to really care about your brand, where there's going to be a choice of this thing or that thing, and they're going to lean towards the brand that they have that loyalty to or strong positive sentiment.
Yeah, as our friend Rand Frischkin always says, do things that don't scale. So I think a lot of the smaller merchants are going to be scared that they can't match that operational excellence, of the Amazons and the Walmarts, but they can, as they say, give a shit. They can care for the customer and deliver those excellent experiences. And we know in traditional search, you talked about brand, that there's a huge correlation between, brand search and, regular organic ranking. So when people are looking for you, seeking you out, that is a moat that, nobody can breach. Walmart can't breach it if people are looking for you.
Yeah, I saw you posted about that today, that brand authority tool, and I played around with that a little bit. And actually, it's funny, it reminded me of the early days of Open Site Explorer a little bit. And they're even using the term, I think, DA, and which was, of course, domain authority back in the day. But I don't know if you want to tell folks about that, but I thought that was a pretty cool.
It's a tool built by Dan Petrovic of Australia, brilliant guy in the AI search space. that measures how much your brand already exists in Google Gemini, based on training data and whatnot. And it's really interesting to show people, because it kind of predicts how well you're going to appear for just general queries. And you can influence it by getting your name out there in different areas.
Yeah, and kind of final thought, and you reminded me bringing up our buddy Rand. And I don't know if it was Rand. It really resonated with me. It was, everyone looks at search as like a technology, but it's really, what is it? It's a behavior. And it doesn't matter that because people are using something we know as Google and a search bar, and they're looking at search engine result pages. Like, that's not the thing. It's the human behavior of search that is important, that people have been doing long before Google ever existed as hunter and gatherers. And so to take it in that sort of mindset and that frame, I think with agentic commerce specifically, it's basically helping people just find the thing they want quicker, right? Taking that big spaghetti bowl of a mess that we're all used to, hopping around, clicking on these different ads, going to social media, going to Amazon and Walmart, now can make that a little straighter to go from A to B and minimize the friction, as you brought up before, in that search.
All right. Tim, we're going to wrap things up. People who want to talk to you about agentic commerce, if you have questions, I think LinkedIn is the best place to find you.
Tim Resnik, Resnik. Everyone puts a C in it. There's no C.
Don't put the C in. We don't do that in Oregon. Thank you for being our first guest on Zippy Signal.
Thank you for having me.